Hi, I'm back. I was interrupted. I had less record time than I thought I did. As I was saying, with the sphere of hydrogen that would emerge and the quantum entanglements would migrate to the periphery of that hydrogen sphere and exist much like a carpet of short stacks, and every time the hydrogen would expand, the particle emergence would increase, and over time the negatron and positron infiltration of the hydrogen state would produce ionization with regard to the negatrons bonding to the hydrogen, and the positrons would whiffle about like free electrons until there was a threshold of negatrons and positrons in this state where they would essentially produce an electron entanglement state to exist within the hydrogen state that would allow quarks to emerge, and more hydrogen would emerge within the hydrogen state due to the constant heaving and contracting. As the inundation of particles continued to allow the increase of hydrogen to achieve the stable or initial burn, ignition, the ignition would cause all of the quantum entanglement carpet state on the surface to cast off with the plasma or radion emission that would surge out through the field of approaching quantums that would still exist light years and light years away and would still have a great volume of mass to converge upon that already ignited star, causing that field of quantums to galvanize due to the vector shifts involved into bands or shells of quantum entanglements that would continue to converge upon the star. As these waves of quantum particles converged upon the star, the earlier ones would undoubtedly not have the mass index to interrupt the stable burn, so they would be basically bounced back out, and they would meet up with the consecutive shell that would want to converge on that star and essentially join forces until there was enough volumetrics with each consecutive shell of quantum entanglements approaching. By that time, the amount of particles that had achieved a vector convergence in their approach would have produced quantum entanglements like this to emerge far from the star that has ignited. So they interrupt the stable burn, produce a massive carpet of quantum entanglements on the surface, and the star compresses under the force, and then as it heaves, this quantum carpet entanglement produces a myriad of particles to emerge, so the electron progression continues, and they continue to infiltrate that hydrogen state, and over time, the reignition of the star re-emerges, and again it sends out a radion emission, and it further galvanizes the approaching shells of quantums into ever denser particle states. Over time, that ever-increasing impact of interrupting the stable burn of this star and causing a compression and decompression and allowing progressive particles to emerge. The volumetrics of the converging particles was so great, and the ever-increasing compression values would produce a state of disparity within the star proper that would cause shells of hydrogen to form, with the star igniting within and the radion surge impacting the next shell of hydrogen in such a way that it would actually achieve a state of ignition on its surface, and the radion emission from that would compress the next hydrogen shell until it got to the emission point where it was affecting incoming quantum entanglements again. And this process would continue and augment with the ever-increasing velocity and volume of particles involved. What I call a Russian nesting doll effect would emerge that would allow an incredible vast star mass to exist in that protostar without allowing or causing a black hole to emerge, due to the constant compression and decompression involved. Once the last wave of quantums for that overall region of space impacted that protostar shell or Russian nesting doll state, that impact being the greatest, the compression being the greatest, producing an incredibly great decompression wave to resolve in its wake. It would have taken a long time due to the massive amount of star matter involved. My guess would be somewhere in the 10 galaxy range for each protostar to emerge, give or take, and there would always be variance. By this stage of the progression of things, there would be enough variance for each protostar to exhibit a variance in their overall star mass index. I should pause. So at this point, the initial cast off of the outer shell would produce a drop in the overall mass index, the gravitational compression incline achievable versus all of the compression and decompression values still resolving within the inner shells, would cause the next decompression wave, which would always have higher value than the compression involved, causes each shell to cast off in sequence as the star inside eventually gets down to its true state. Its decompression under that progression would essentially be augmented by the amount of matter it has discharged, as much as its own cohesive state due to any heavy elements that may have formed during this time. My assertion is that every element, everything that comprises our solar system and our galaxy would have been produced in these protostars, and they would have all discharged their matter outwards, and it would have met at some point where the convolutions that occurred within that meeting would have existed on a scale where when the vortexing was great enough, it would produce a galaxy, and when it wasn't, it would essentially just be nebulous gases that would eventually form a giant ice ball with an accretion disk of lesser ice balls swirling around it, all very discrete out beyond the galaxies, in between the galaxies, but in close proximity. Let's see, where am I? So essentially my assertion is that the relatively large empty regions of space that we observe in between the wispy, convoluted, interconnected galactic relationships, if we were to draw a line between each galaxy we can observe in a CGI configuration and just look at the lattice of lines, it would look sort of like wispy bands with big hollows in and around. So essentially those big hollows would be suspectable places for where these protostars would have existed. So that's essentially the emergence theory with regards to particles and how the universe emerged as we know it. And I also have a theory about black holes and how the universe ends and how it re-enters the metaphysical state, and I will be calling that video, I don't know, denouement is, I don't know, that's kind of hard to spell. End of universe. Yeah, end of universe, I guess. No, that's no good, because it's not the end. I guess it would be the re-entering of metaphysical state. Metaphysical state. Re-entry of metaphysical state. Yeah, that's about as good as it gets.